And this desire to see members of parliament and politicians and people, until we do that. But that's just the effects. What we need to address here today is a structural, that they must come here and we must reveal to each other and tell each other. Mr. Speaker, why is it we are for any courts of law that can point out and say, this is what we have done as an institution, so that people know this is what we are doing. We will be willing, Mr. Speaker, because this has featured prominently. We are being even challenged, Mr. Speaker, as an institution on the things that we have done and said and the laws that we have passed. We must make it difficult. It must pain people, Mr. Speaker, to break the system after we repair it. It must, the punishment must be punitive, Mr. Speaker, so that it gets to a point where people fear. You know, people don't fear to be corrupt in this country because they know what is the worst that will happen. I will be taken to court, I will pay a bail, and I will walk scot-free. Chances are I'll enjoy that money until I die. EACC must come to us, Mr. Speaker, and tell us even this new jurisprudence that they are trying to establish, where somebody steals $1 billion, then says, I am willing to part with 300 million, and we remove the case. Unless we didn't read properly. But good leaders have said, this is not the time to apportion blame. If there are things that they want us to change, is it their budget? Is it the law as we defined it, Mr. Speaker? Let us listen with an open mind and say, tell us what it is that will respond to this particular issue. Mr. Speaker, the judiciary also has been very silent while all this has been going. In fact, the only thing I've seen the Chief Justice speak about was on the issue of abductions, and I think later on, when her chambers were raided, she issued a statement or something to that effect. But listening into what we are being told and the conversation going around, part of the broken system is our judicial system, Mr. Speaker. People know, Mr. Speaker, that even if you're taken to court, you can find your way around it, Mr. Speaker, that you can buy justice. A country that sells its justice, Mr. Speaker, is not a country. If I know that all it takes for me to get away with murder, Mr. Speaker, is sufficient resources in my bank account, then that is not a country. Judicial Service Commission, Mr. Speaker, just like us and all of us that are in positions of responsibility, Mr. Speaker, must engage and be willing to guide us and say this is what has happened. If you listen, as people who are speaking, people have shared their experiences, how they have been disinherited of properties that were left by their parents because a rich person showed up, Mr. Speaker, and as orphaned children, they could not put up a fight before our courts of law. That is not the foundation of a judicial system, Mr. Speaker. And we need time to reflect. JSC must tell us, what is it that we need to do, Mr. Speaker? Equal opportunities has featured prominently. Many people are saying, we know that all it will take for you to get an employment anywhere is to have people of influence. We have constitutionally mandated institutions, Mr. Speaker, NCIC, and so many others. Let's see the studies that they have done so far out of the millions that we have sent to them over the years. Are they just collecting per diems and traveling to Naivasha? Or they have done a scientific study that can help us to appreciate? You know, the problem in this country, Mr. Speaker, is that people love proposing half solutions. And that's what we are being told, that that is not enough. It is not just enough to tell us that this community has this percentage of jobs, this one's has the other. Can you make recommendations? And we are willing to come and pass a resolution of the House, Mr. Speaker. If it is established, Mr. Speaker, that the community that I come from has more than an equal share of opportunities, Mr. Speaker, in the various cadres and levels of government, Mr. Speaker, let's pass a resolution here and say that until such a time that others get an opportunity equitably, Mr. Speaker, we don't give chance to those because, but unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, listening and reading the reports that have come from NCIC, it is so basic and it's like the person who designed it just wanted to appease people with little facts here and there, Mr. Speaker. Oh, Kikuyus have this percentage, Luos have the other. That's not enough. Break it down. Work like a serious institution. Tell us how many CEOs exist in public service. Give us their distribution. How many senior level managers exist? How many are ordinary clerks, Mr. Speaker? We could be talking about a particular community that has a certain share, Mr. Speaker, but they are all clerks and drivers. It's not the same. We need a more detailed study so that you lead us as a house into making this conversation. I'm trying to rush, Mr. Speaker, because I know time is not on our side. Governance on our value systems, Mr. Speaker, featured prominently in this conversation. And we must put it either by law, by design. What is it that you do as a public official when certain things are said about you? How is it, Mr. Speaker, that in certain countries, that you as a public officials, even when you're just accused of having an extramarital affair, forget about stealing public resources. The system is so advanced that you're challenged and are told, Mr. XYZ, if you cannot be faithful even to your partner, you cannot be faithful to your current, to the country, that your character has been found wanting. And people are asked to step aside on such occasions, and people do the honorable thing and say, I think I no longer enjoy the trust of the people. Allow me to pursue other things. On personal matters, I'm not talking about public issues, Mr. Speaker. The problem with us is even when we have been challenged on public issues, Mr. Speaker, we still want to stick and die until, you know, the famous quote that somebody once said, I'd rather die than resign. On debt, Mr. Speaker, I have a certain level of reprieve as a person, but it still doesn't help me. Like I said, these young people don't care, and the people that are speaking don't care, because on the two occasions that the debt question appeared before this House, the last term, I voted against it, both to move it at 6 trillion and eventually when we moved it to 10 trillion, Mr. Speaker. But that doesn't help. That's history. We can point fingers and say, you moved, you did this or the other. It doesn't matter at this point. The thing we are being told first, Mr. Speaker, is that when Kenyans look keenly, they are trying to locate 10 trillion in the country, and they cannot see it. So they're asking, are you sure, first of all, that we owe 10 trillion? And I have made public confessions, Mr. Speaker. Those that served with us in the Budget and Finance Committee last time, Mr. Speaker, know that when we asked for Kenya's debt register, it was brought to us on an Excel sheet. No records beyond that. And you're being told, company this, you owe them this much, this is the rate at which you borrowed, and so on and so forth. It pointed out to a problem. In fact, on the day that I made my contribution and said that I reject this approval of the debt, raising of the debt ceiling to 10 trillion, that's part of the reasons that I raised that afternoon, Mr. Speaker. And I said, until Parliament has a counter copy of what the Treasury is borrowing, Mr. Speaker, and we rearrange that whole space of our debt, Mr. Speaker, we are not yet out of the woods. Therefore, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the issue of debt, Mr. Speaker, but we are being told that a public audit of our debt situation, Mr. Speaker, is mandatory at this particular point. And I know the executive will do theirs, but even us as Parliament, because it's us who failed in that regard, we must carry out our own, so that we counter-check with what the executive is doing. Parliamentary Budget Office can lead this exercise, but if they need the expertise of other audit firms, including international, reputable, established institutions that can help us in this conversation, people who know about multilateral lending, Mr. Speaker, and going to the financial markets, because there are issues of Eurobond therein and other institutions that we have borrowed from, Mr. Speaker, let us have that conversation so that we know, first of all, Mr. Speaker, what is our debt exposure. Look at even the debt ceiling change of law that we did earlier. Makes sense. We argued and said we want to change how we calculate our debt status, Mr. Speaker, as opposed to having it as a static number, make it as a percentage of the GDP, because that's a more globally accepted standard. And that's fine. And I supported that motion, Mr. Speaker. And we said in 3 years' time, we want to bring our debt sustainability to 55% of the GDP. It is now at 61. We have 3 years. But what is the plan, Mr. Speaker? What did we learn from the past? How comes when you were passing that particular legislation, we didn't tie it so neatly so that we know. You know, bringing debt as a percentage to the GDP to 55% is not an occurrence, Mr. Speaker. It's not an event. It's a process. You have to grow down your fiscal deficit over the years. We didn't put it in law, Mr. Speaker. And it's not just enough for us to be satisfied and say that we have a promise that in 3 years' time, that's where we'll be. At the time of exiting this conversation, Mr. Speaker, we must tighten that law so that even as those that do our budget at the Treasury know that the maximum fiscal deficit that we can get for this year, 2024, 2025, is this one. And you tighten it so that by you leave them with no option. So that by 2027, Mr. Speaker, when you're supposed to be at 55%, they have no option but to get there. But if we leave the law as it is, I can tell you for a fact that we will get to 2027, we will still be at 60, Mr. Speaker, or even more if we don't change. And we must make a decision, Mr. Speaker, as we sit and reflect, because debt has featured prominently in this conversation. As I move to conclude, Mr. Speaker, SRC, Salaries and Remuneration Commission, have been silent as this whole debate has been raging. Silence is not an option anymore, Mr. Speaker. They have to speak to the country. They have to tell us what is it that you're going to do so that we reduce our public expenditure on wages and salaries from 46% to the mandatory 35%, Mr. Speaker. If it means taking a pay cut, we as members of parliament, Mr. Speaker, good people, we have been told that it's not possible, that members of parliament will never do it. We don't have an option. We must do it, Mr. Speaker. The yearly increment that is now being discussed, that we are being told that, I saw that being reported or misreported in sections of the media, that we are now going to earn more. SRC continues to be silent about it, but we must make a resolution and say we reject even that one in light of the financial situation. But as it is, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, even if the high earners were to take a shave on their salary, that is still not enough. I don't have the statistics, and that's why I've said some of these constitutional commissions have failed us, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what will be the percentage of Kenyans say that earn over and above 100 and 150. But I'm certain, Mr. Speaker, they are in the slim minority of less than 10%. 90% of our public officers earn less than 100,000 and below, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, whatever savings that we can make there, let us make. But over and above, the thing that people don't like, Mr. Speaker, and this featured prominently. Senator Omogeni is out, but he knows this featured prominently in our NADCO talks. And a report that we tabled here, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, which we haven't done with speed, Mr. Speaker, captured all the wastages that are in the public expenditure space and what we need to do as a country. From page 546 of the NADCO report, I think, to almost page 600, Mr. Speaker. Where things that we understand, things are tight. It's the most obvious thing that people do. Young people are telling us when you have a job with Safaricom, you can live in Langata. But the day you lose that job, you move downwards to either to South B or Umoja until things get better. That's what we are not able to do as a leadership. We know for a fact that when things were better, we could all fly business as members of parliament. But if you read the recommendations from NADCO, we have said any flight that is less than 3 to 4 hours, surely, must you fly business as a public official? 3 hours. You will not even sleep. You know? And so many things, Mr. Speaker, recurrent expenditure and wastages. Institutions, even parliament. And you know, I saw our staff criticize us and say, yes, we have been saying this or the other. But even our staffers, they need to know that this must come to them. You know, I've served as staff welfare chair, so I know a thing or two about expenditure in this institution. You will hardly get anybody in parliament, Mr. Speaker, on a Friday. Even to consider a report on something that happened in parliament, Mr. Speaker, people cannot consider it in parliament. Must be considered in Naivasha or Mombasa. As is the case in all our public institutions, we must lead by example, Mr. Speaker. And before we exit out of this motion today, we must give a blow-by-blow detail and say, what is it? What happens? Why is it that people cannot think in public offices on Fridays? That there must be somewhere in Naivasha, there must be somewhere in Kisumu, there must be elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, I don't think that there is any correlation between better consideration of a tender document or evaluation exercise that comes when you leave Nairobi, Mr. Speaker. These are extraordinary times, Mr. Speaker, and I must appreciate that there has been guidance, Mr. Speaker, and we are being reminded that because the finance bill has now been sent back via presidential memorandum and all clauses have been deleted. You know, that's a space that many people misunderstand. And sometimes we need to help people also appreciate parliamentary procedures. Number one, finance bill remains to be a bill. It's not an act of parliament, like many people have seen misreported in public spaces and says, oh, it takes effect on such and such a day. But as a sign of goodwill and trust, because trust has been completely eroded at this time, Mr. Speaker, I think the wise thing to do is for the National Assembly to come. The Budget and Finance Committee considers that recommendation immediately, Mr. Speaker, so that people are satisfied that that is behind us. But having done that, of more importance, the National Treasury must table the new budget estimates that captures, Mr. Speaker, the new reality. Less 3.9 trillion, less the 346 that was lost. And people must take a cut. In fact, my proposal, Mr. Speaker, it's a very simple exercise. 346 out of 3.9 trillion budget, Mr. Speaker, is 9%. At least at the national level, because I wouldn't wish that the same be applied to our counties. For counties, it must be on equity basis, Mr. Speaker. But on government, national government institutions, just do a pro rata cut. If your budget was 300 billion, Mr. Speaker, as a state department or an agency, you submit your new estimates less than 9%, so that you're left to go and do the reappropriation of whatever needs to be done. And by next week, Mr. Speaker, we have a new budget that captures that particular reality, because, like we are being reminded, living within our means is not an option anymore. And I believe that when our colleagues reconvene in the National Assembly, they'll be guiding us in that particular. But I have to be specific and say, because in the first instance, the distribution to counties was not pro rata, then the shave, I don't know what is being proposed, and we will wish to be reasoned, but it cannot be pro rata to counties, Mr. Speaker. We must, at the very least, I know it's not in my place, but at the very least, Mr. Speaker, counties should not get less than what they got last year. At the very least, Mr. Speaker. I know it's difficult, but somehow, someway, we must protect. Though, members, I don't know if you follow this conversation, even in our own county level, people have become more critical in budget-making process. And they are beginning to ask our county governors, can you lay out your budget in public? So that we see also, where is your confidential vote, like there was. You know, there are many budget lines that people don't follow. But now people are becoming more alive to reality of the budget-making process in our counties. And we'll speak later. I'm sure when colleagues speak, they will get time. I cannot say everything. To say on also the architecture of devolution, whether as is presently moving, Mr. Speaker, whether it can work. You know, Mr. Speaker, you are governor. Between 2013 and 2017, many young people, women, and the vulnerable made a life out of doing business with counties. And there was spread of resources within. You know, in every village, you could see a young person and you'd be told so and so. He's a road contractor, he supplies this and the other. He trades with the county, and therefore, people could begin to appreciate. These are things that were completely unknown to the country before the promulgation of the new constitution. Post-2017, there are no such people in our villages, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I have said on the floor of this house many times that unless the governor is your personal friend, or sometimes even unless he's your father, nobody can dare supply to our counties anymore. Nobody can dare trade with them. As protectors and custodians of devolution, Mr. Speaker, The House charged with the responsibility to make sure that devolution works in our county. Before we exit this motion, we must propose a way forward. If it means forcing our governors to first clear all the pending bills that have been found to be eligible, Mr. Speaker, before rolling out any new development, so that you give life at least to the many women and young people, Mr. Speaker, that have lost whatever little savings that they had by trading with counties, Mr. Speaker, we must pass that particular resolution today, Mr. Speaker. On the issue of police, I just want to speak to two final issues, then I conclude. I once said in a public forum, I was asking, where is the IG? That was in relation to the killings that were going on in Kerio Valley. It's been 2 weeks of protests, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans have lost their lives. Others have been beaten. There have been challenges. Police have faced also very difficult and hostile gangs on the streets. I am yet to hear the voice of the Inspector General. I am deeply troubled by that, Mr. Speaker. It cannot be right. We were in this country, though I was not a leader and I was a young person in university, Mr. Speaker, when we faced the post-election violence, day by day, General Hussein Mohammed will brief the country and speak to the country and give them an update of what is happening. How can we face such a crisis, Mr. Speaker, up to this particular point? I don't know what the Inspector General thinks. I don't know what is the challenge. We don't know these things that are being discussed. Mr. Speaker, the question at the back of my mind, is this really the right man for this job? Mr. Speaker, we must think critically, finally, about Article 37. We have had conversations and debates here on this House, were the demonstrations peaceful or not. How is it that we continue to struggle as a country with this thing of peaceful demonstrations? What is it that we are supposed to do? Can't we guide and provide the way forward so that people can know that if I want to peacefully demonstrate as expected of me, under rights guaranteed under my constitution, what is it that we are supposed to do? Because a new trend is emerging, and we have seen this, Mr. Speaker, where any time when you organize a demonstration, infiltration and separating between those that are peacefully protesting, Mr. Speaker, and those that want to take advantage of the environment and the climate that has been created is difficult to distinguish. And I'd wish to request the House that we don't exit on this motion until first we provide the way forward and guidance. I listened, for example, Mr. Speaker, to one gentleman, one of the organizers of the Occupy Parliament crusade, and he said, according to them, they just wanted to come and sit outside here and listen and make noise as the debate on the finance bill was ongoing. And I said, okay, fair enough. But unfortunately, in the way that they communicated, it was impossible to tell how to do that kind of an occupation. I wish, Mr. Speaker, at that point, that there had been an engagement, either with your office, because you're the person who permits this kind of engagements, so that we know how is it that if today there are 100,000 people who want to come and present a public petition to Parliament, we should be able to facilitate it, so that they know what time they'll come, what they want to do, so that we set the rules and agree, and people know. And we don't provide an environment or a climate that is right for people with sinister motives, Mr. Speaker. I know for a fact that it was not the design of the young people that wanted to protest outside Parliament for Parliament to look like it looks this afternoon. They had no intention of banning anything. I don't think it was in their design to destroy the amount of property that has been destroyed here. I don't think it was in their design, Mr. Speaker, for members to flee for their life. They wanted to come and present a petition. Therefore, we have to think and propose as a way forward of how is it that we can guarantee every citizen how we protect their rights, because there are two inherent dangers, Mr. Speaker. If we don't provide a way forward and a way out of this particular conversation, then it shall be known forever, Mr. Speaker, that it is impossible to have a peaceful protest in this country, yet other countries have it. When we travel, even Anyway, I don't want to get into a diplomatic challenge by mentioning various countries, Mr. Speaker. But there are countries that you think even are less democratic, but they have provided the space and the means for people to exercise their democratic right, on the right to peaceful protest, Mr. Speaker. And it's provided for, and people make their voice heard. I don't know how we can do it. I know colleague members can guide us on how this is done, but the long and short of this conversation, Mr. Speaker, is that we are sick, and the ordinary medicine that we have administered over the years is not likely to heal us. We need new medication, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, with those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move and request the leader of minority, Senator Justice Retired Stewart Madzayo, to second this motion, Mr. Speaker, and lead the country towards the right path. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Asante, Bwana Spika. Bwana Spika, cha kwanza ningependa kuunga mkono hoja hii. Mswada huu naunga mkono kwa sababu unakuja katika wakati unaofaa. Bwana Spika, nasimama hivi leo hapa ndani ya bunge la Senate nikiwa na majonzi makubwa sana. Tukiwa na majonzi sisi kama bunge la Senate kwa sababu hivi sasa Kenya imeweza kupoteza maisha ya watoto wa Kenya 39. Na vile vile tukiangalia katika mahospitali yetu yote katika Kenya, kuanzia sekta zote katika Kenya, kama ni kuanzia baharini mpaka Lake Victoria, kuanzia ukumbi wa magharibi mpaka mashariki, Kenya nzima katika kila mahospitali kuna watu ambao wameketi huko sasa, nambari 361, ambao wameweza kufanyiwa matibabu. Wengine wamekatwa maguu, wengine wamekatwa mikono, wengine wamefanyiwa operation za tumbo, vichwa. Hivi sasa wako na majanga ya maumivu wakiwa wamelala katika hizo hospitali. Bwana Spika, ni jambo la kusikitisha sisi kama bunge tukiwa hapa kuona kwamba nchi yetu inaenda njia ambayo sio. Na kunao muhimu zaidi kuweza kuona ya kwamba tumeweza kuregesha nchi imeenda katika njia inayofaa. Bwana Spika, kitu cha kwanza, tuko na vijana katika Kenya ambao ni vijana wadogo, vijana mabarobaro ambao wao ni Gen Z. Hao vijana mabarobaro, Bwana Spika, wamekuja barabarani, wamekuja kwenye maandamano wakiwa wao wako na chupa za maji wameshika katika mkono wao wa kushoto, na upande wa kulia wameshika simu, ili kuweza kurekodi ile historia ambao wamekuja barabarani wakifanya maandamano wakidai haki za kila Mkenya ziweze kutendeka. Bwana Spika, hawa vijana wa Gen Z hawana ukabila, hawana ujamaa, hawana undugu. Wao wanajuana kama Wakenya. Wao wanajuana kama Wakenya ambao ni ndugu moja, ni watu wanaishi pamoja, ni watu nchi yao ni hii Kenya, na hata Kenya ikiharibika hawana nchi nyingine ambao watakimbilia. Kwa hiyo wamekuja kutengeza historia na kurekodi historia kwa sababu wanadai haki zao. Bwana Spika, jambo la kusikitisha, tunaona ya kwamba polisi ambao ni utumishi kwa wote wakiongozwa na Inspector General Kome walitumia nguvu kupita kiasi kuweza kusimamisha maandamano haya ambayo yalisababisha vifo, ambayo yalisababisha watu kuumia. Hivi sasa tunavyoongea kuna watu pengine wamekatwa miguu, wamekatwa mikono, tumbo zao hazijulikani kama watapona namna gani. Na kufikia sasa, Bwana Spika, ni jambo la kusikitisha. Na mimi nataka kusema ya kwamba wazee wote, wakina mama, poleni sana. Sisi kama bunge la Senate tuko pamoja na nyinyi katika barabara hii, na tunaendelea kusupport hao vijana kwa sababu ya kwamba maandamano yao yako katika sheria na yako ndani ya katiba. Bwana Spika, nataka kusema ya kwamba inajulikana kiwazi sababu ya haya maandamano. Bwana Spika, sababu ya haya maandamano yaliletwa kwa sababu ya ile bili ama ule mswada wa fedha. Mswada wa fedha ulikuwa na mahesabu ambayo yalikuwa si sawa. Yalikuwa yanaweza kutoza ushuru wananchi ambao umepita kiasi. Bwana Spika, tunajua ya kwamba ushuru ni haki ya kila mwananchi aweze kulipa. Lakini ushuru ukipita kiasi ama mambo ambayo hayafai kutoza ushuru yakiwekwa hapo, ni lazima watu waweze kuandamana ili kupata haki yao. Bwana Spika, tunaona kabisa ya kwamba hii bili ya fedha ama huu mswada wa fedha uliweza kuleta mushkili mkubwa sana ndani ya nchi yetu ya Kenya. Na sisi hatuwezi kulaumu wale vijana wa Gen Z kwa sababu walipokuja walisema ya kwamba mswada huu unagandamiza kila mwananchi. Haugandamizi tajiri peke yake, haugandamizi maskini peke yake, bali unagandamiza kila mtu katika nchi. Bwana Spika, sisi kama viongozi tunasema ya kwamba ni lazima tuwe na nidhamu. Tuwe na nidhamu kwa sababu Bwana Spika, tunaona ya kwamba hivi wananchi wanavyoendelea kuishi, hawaishi katika maisha mema. Maisha yamekuwa ghali na kila kitu katika Kenya kimekuwa hakiwezi kupatikana kirahisi. Jambo ambalo nataka kusema zaidi ni kwamba kumezuka ile sehemu ya watu kuwa na majivuno. Wale watu ambao wanajivunia sana ni wale watu ambao wanafanya ufisadi. Bwana Spika, tumeona katika harakati za wale wa Kenya ambao juzi jana tulikuwa pamoja. Hivi leo watu hawajamaliza miaka miwili ndani ya hili bunge. Tunaona ya kwamba watu maisha yao yamegeuka. Wamekuwa matajiri zaidi ya vile inavyokana. Bwana Spika, utajiri huu ambao unaopata kigafla, kama ambao umechukua ndege unaruka juu unakuwa tajiri mara moja na dakika 45 unashuka chini umefika Mombasa, ni hali ya aibu. Na mambo kama haya ambayo tunaonyeshana, mambo ya kusikitisha. Kenya yetu inataka iwe na amani. Wako watu wanaishi. Tuliona hata yule balozi wa Uingereza alisema sasa watu wamekuja hivi karibuni walikuwa hawana kitu. Sasa wamekuwa matajiri mpaka wanatutapikia. Hii ndio tunaona ya kwamba Gen Z wanasema hii aibu kama hii isitendeke katika nchi yetu. Kwa hiyo Bwana Spika, sisi tunasema tu ya kwamba vile ambavyo rais aliweza kukataa kusaini na akaregesha, ni kwamba huo ulikuwa mwelekeo wa kisawasawa. Nataka kusema ya kwamba wale ambao wamepoteza maisha yao, Bwana Spika, waweze kupewa na waweze kwa serikali iweze kuangalia kwa wale wote ambao walikuwa wamepatikana hasara hiyo katika maandamano haya. Bwana Spika, sisi kama bunge la Senate tuko tayari wakati wote. Hawa Gen Z wakiwa wanataka kutuona, sisi kama bunge la Senate tuko tayari. Waseme ni wapi, kwa sababu hatutaki kuonana na wananchi. Hapana. Hata wakati wa vita yanaweza kutekeleza mwelekeo wa taifa. Hii hasara ya maandamano, na kwa wale vijana wote Gen Z, bunge la Senate liko. Bwana Spika, la mwisho, sasa wamelala katika mochari ambao ni 39 katika ile ratiba ya hesabu, na pia kunaweza kuwa pengine kuna wengisi ambao walitumia nguvu zao, walitumia bunduki ozi, waliweza kutumia bunduki zile ambazo ziko na risasi na kupiga hawa wananchi ambao walifariki. Tunasema ya kwamba hao polisi hatua lazima ya bunduki ama kutumia nguvu zaidi na kuumiza wananchi ama kupoteza maisha yao. Kitu cha pili, nataka korokoroni kwa makosa haya ya kuandamana tu, tunasema ya kwamba hao watu wawachiliwe mara moja. Nataka kuuliza rais ambaye ana uwezo yeye kama rais na aliyeweza kuandika hawa watu katika serikali yake, kuna watu wako na record za ufisadi, kuna watu wamefanya vitendo ambavyo havifai kulingana na sheria za Kenya, ile tunaita katika criminal acts. Ikiwa hao watu wako katika serikali yako, afadhali awachishe kazi mara moja. Vile vile tunasema ya kwamba jambo lingine ni kwamba ile bili ya IEBC hivi sasa ambayo iko kwenye mikono yake, iko katika mikono ya rais, ako nayo kuondoa hili vuguvugu la kwamba hutaki kusaini ama huwezi kusaini ama kuna tashwishi yoyote. Wananchi hivi sasa wanataka hiyo IEBC iwekwe ndani, ikuwe sheria mara moja, ili mambo ya Kenya yaweze kuendelea kulikana na uchaguzi katika yale maeneo ambayo hayana wabunge ama hayana wale watu wanaowakilisha. Kwa hiyo aiweke kidole mara moja. Kuna wale walimu wa JSS na wale madaktari ambao wanamaliza, ambao wamepita mitihani yao, hawa ni lazima waandikwe mara moja. Na mwisho pia ile program ambayo ilikuwa inasaidia watoto wa watu wasiojiweza maskini kama school feeding program, hiyo iregeshwe mara moja ili watoto waweze kuenda skuli wakijua watapata chakula. La mwisho, lakini la mwisho na muhimu zaidi, ni kwamba sisi kama wabunge wa Senate, nakubaliana na alivyosema kiongozi walio wengi, vile watu wanasema kwamba ati mishahara inaongezwa. Bwana Spika, mimi nasema kwamba sitaki mshahara wangu uongezwe. Sitaki. Nimekataa. Wacha hiyo pesa ambayo ilikuwa sisi tupewe kama wabunge wa Senate, na najua ndugu zangu maseneta wako hapa, tuna shida za pesa ndio, lakini nina hakika watakubaliana na mimi ya kwamba si wakati mzuri sasa sisi kuongezwa mishahara. Haifai, hatuitaki. Tumekataa. Ndugu yangu Khalwale, utakubaliana na mimi ya kwamba ushakula chumvi ya kutosha. Mshahara hivi sasa ukae kando, wapewe wale ambao hawajiwezi ili waweze kuendelea na maisha yao sawa sawa. Ama ile pesa ambayo ingepewa katika mishahara ipelekwe kwa hawa ambao walipata majeruhi, wale ambao wamefariki, wale ambao wako na shida zao, ziende huko ili ziweze kuwasaidia. Bwana Spika, huu ni mswada ambao uko na maana sana. Na sisi tunajua, tunaita uwiano, tunajua sote ni wa Kenya. Kenya ikiharibika itakuwa ni nchi yetu. Hatuna nchi nyingine ya kwenda isipokuwa kubaki hapa ndani ya Kenya. Kwa hiyo tunatakiana kila laheri kuona kwamba serikali yetu na watu wetu wa Kenya tumekaa pamoja kama ndugu moja, tuwe na amani, tupendane, tuweze kurejesha nchi yetu katika njia ya amani na mwelekeo. Asante sana Bwana Spika. Naunga mkono.
Honorable Senators, I will now proceed to propose the question. Recognizing the state of the nation at this moment, the ongoing protests following the passing of the Finance Bill, National Assembly Bills number 30 of 2024, on the 25th of June 2024 by the National Assembly, the loss of lives, maiming, and loss of property that has been occasioned following these protests, cognizant that pursuant to Article 115(1)(b) of the Constitution, His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya declined to assent to the bill and referred it back to the National Assembly with recommendation to delete all clauses of the bill, acknowledging that the conversation on the Finance Bill has triggered the broader important public conversation on the question of the high cost of living, juxtaposed against the wasteful expenditure in all public institutions, including Parliament. Further, acknowledging the issues raised by the youth and other members of public to do with corruption, impunity, incompetence within state and public appointments, opulence, lifestyles of public officers, unemployment and high cost of living, amongst other issues bedeviling the economy. Now, therefore, the Senate calls upon, 1, the National Assembly to expeditiously consider the Presidential Memorandum pursuant to Article 115(2)(a), 2, all government ministries, departments and agencies, and constitutional commissions, including Parliament, to put in place austerity measures in undertaking their respective functions. 3, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and other government multi-sector agencies in the governance, justice, law, and order sector to upscale and make concerted effort to fight corruption. And 4, the National Police Service to seize abductions, unlawful arrests, extrajudicial killings, and exercise restraint in dealing with peaceful and unarmed demonstrators. 5, release of all persons arrested for planning and participating in peaceful demonstrations relating to the enactment of the Finance Bill. 6, the government to waive hospital bills for persons who have been injured and defray funeral expenses for those who lost their lives during the demonstrations. And 7, the judiciary to prioritize and expedite all court cases relating to the enactment of the Finance Bill and the resultant demonstrations. 2, considers all the challenges facing the country and makes necessary recommendations to address them. Now, the floor is open. I call upon Senator Boni of Kakamega to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, accept my compliments for allowing us to reserve time and place for this very important motion. And Mr. Speaker, allow me to equally compliment the leader of the majority and the leader of my minority for speaking not just from their minds, but especially from their hearts. I never thought in my life that in this house I would listen to the wonderful speech by the young Senator Aaron Cheruiyot. We have been trying to steer this parliament in that direction, and Some people wanted to read defiance. That at no time in this parliament have we ever locked anybody of property for them to have an opportunity for a photo session in this house. Open, but it always have people to come and sit in these benches. We didn't have passing by profound, heartfelt condolences and whose property was destroyed. Mr. Speaker, a woman who has been selling me fried groundnuts and oranges in Kakamega, Caroline Shiramba. Equally here in Nairobi, for those who thought that this was something for a particular set of Kenyans, when I went, one of my chiefs of Kenya was also involved. I saw this. I particularly don't know where my children were. Probably they were also involved. The only thing, 4 things that are unprecedented have taken, refused to assent to the finance bill. It is unprecedented. 2, Mr. Speaker, others call it desegregation of parliament. In the history of the 4 presidents we have had in this country, have they ever contemplated? Finally, you saw across the whole country members of the public touching, and therefore, as we say in our community, when you are mourning, you don't mourn. Speaker, we are where we are today because Kenyans hate and are angry with the ongoings in the country. And if we don't speak to them and take action, we will go nowhere. It was never the finance bill. It was simply that the finance bill was a trigger. Why? Because public servants, led by ministers, are very, Mr. Speaker, corrupt. And people hate this, and people are angry. Yesterday, colleagues, I was called by a minister whose name I don't wish to bring on the floor because it's not necessary. And he was very angry with me for the position that I have taken, especially over the weekend in Nabaholo, over corruption in the cabinet. He told me very many strong and bad things. Because people who the other day we were working with here want to think because the Constitution has given them a different office as opposed to the offices as ourselves we have been given, they are therefore in high heaven, they should be worshipped. Nobody should mention their name, even when they are wrong. Mr. Speaker, people are angry and hate public servants because of our own making. The public display of wealth and opulence, unless members of the public can quickly see where you've gotten it, they will not be happy. Over the weekend, I was speaking of a young member of parliament from my community who has bought a helicopter. And I know him very well. I wish him well to continue accumulating wealth. I wish him well to continue accumulating wealth. But please, I'm asking the president to ask himself, how can the membership of an MP to a committee of parliament be the basis for him to be able to afford some of the things that are not affordable? Honorable Didmus Barasa, take it easy. Those helicopters will not change your life. Mr. Speaker, I equally offended somebody whose name I never mentioned in Kakamega over the weekend about this issue of opulence. I just wondered, how would an MP be able to donate 20 million shillings at a Harambe? He was very offended. In another function, I saw a minister of this government carrying a white bag, on the back like this, and started announcing how many millions are in that bag. Said, moja, mbili. No. Mr. Speaker, if we don't refuse these things, people like Murkomen will think that they are giving us their money. It's not their money. Those are proceeds of corruption. This House is saying no. Because of that anger, look at what our children did. Mr. Speaker, people are angry and hate us as leadership because every weekend, helicopters, they crisscross the skies, all of them going to functions where these millions are being dished. Mr. Speaker, the fuel guzzlers that we drive, I know if you go to this parking, Mr. Speaker, you can see the difference between the vehicle four-wheel drive driven by your senators compared to those ones driven by members of the National Assembly. In the parking of the Senate, you see Prados. But in the parking of the National Assembly, you see high-end vehicles that sometimes you only see. And why, Mr. Speaker? Because of an unconstitutional fund called CDF. That unconstitutional fund, the courts made a pronouncement that it was unconstitutional and illegal. How did we respond as Parliament? The National Assembly, without blinking an eye, went and exercised legislative impunity by twisting the act so as to be allowed to continue with that unconstitutional, illegal process. Mr. Speaker, as I speak to these guzzlers, you have seen colleagues. You are there struggling to rush to this Senate, then an MP, then a Secretary General of a political party comes with chase cars, his vehicle having the national flags with a siren, and the police does not arrest those people. The law is very clear on who should actually fly the national flag. The law should be very clear on whose convoy should be cleared with sirens. This is the impunity that is making our young people to turn against us. Mr. Speaker, I want to celebrate the President for the remark he made on Sunday during the interview that he was fielding questions. I did not support the fact that the President was fielding questions. I did not. Because I know that the President has people who are supposed to have fielded those questions. As like the leader of the majority was saying, the responses to security that the President was doing should either have been done by regular briefs by the IG or by Professor Kidura Kindiki. What was the President being put there being humiliated by the people of the media, but I celebrate him for accepting that we have wasteful expenditure in several offices in this country. Professor respected Githu Muigai gave, while in office, a legal advisory opinion on something called the Office of the First Lady. I urge you, colleagues, to go and read that opinion. He convinced me, and those who will read it after me, that the issue of First Lady is actually foreign to our Constitution. As if it's not enough, we had not only have the office of the First Lady, wife of the President, gobbling millions of shillings, we also have another one for the office of the wife of the Deputy President, another one for the office of the wife of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, another one for the office of the governors. I always say, God bless Kenya. If I had that ambition, then if I were to ascend to one of these offices that people think they should have those wives as first ladies, you would shake my family. Who will be my wife? Who will be the first lady? Will be my first wife, my second wife, my third? Which one? Those are private family issues that should never be brought in public. I am a student of Michael Kijana Wamalwa. I am a student of George Welime Captain. I never saw Wamalwa's wife or George Welime's Captain's wife address any function, not in Luhya land, not in their constituencies, nowhere else. Their purpose was to make sure that visitors have eaten. What became of husbands in this country? Mr. Speaker, very quickly, because the light is now on, people are angry and hate us because of impunity. The impunity you are seeing, that we have a director of public prosecutions who, from Monday to Friday, sits scheming on which language and which law to use so as to help people who are politically correct, criminals who have court cases, to be released. I don't know if that is why we separated the office of the Attorney General from the office of the Director of Public Prosecution and made it an independent office. Not only from Kakamega, but the DPP is my sister's son from Malinya there. That it's not necessary. Let criminals who have stolen property, and you know them, go through the due process. If it was working, some of the ministers in office today would not be ministers. They became ministers because a corrupt Parliament allowed them to become ministers, and then the DPP followed it up by withdrawing their cases. Mr. Speaker, impunity of tribalism. Leader of the majority, you have said it. Where will the children from the tribes where the president does not come from, where deputy president does not come from, where the prime cabinet secretary does not come from, how will they get jobs? Mr. Speaker, they hate us because of the impunity of nepotism. I know of a cabinet secretary who has employed in his office 2 sons of, yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the impunity of MPs shooting members of the public dead. And they are set free. And we say we are living in a country of rule of law. Mr. Speaker, There's anger and hatred because the government is unable to fix this monster called CBC system. That system has killed free primary education. That system has destroyed the quality of education. For many years, my children have been doing the exam at Marinya Primary School, all of them. It's only right now that for the first time, my daughter, Sonia Inuni Khaluare, is now in class 7 junior secondary in a private school, because at Marinya Primary School, where we all went to, all my children and myself, it has collapsed. There are 2 teachers in a class of 150 teaching our children of the poor. So there's no learning going on, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, there is anger and hatred because of the insensitivity of this parliament. We are so insensitive that when the issue of housing levy was raised, we did not respond critically. Allow me just to conclude. Mr. Speaker, can I?
Give Senator Boni further 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the housing levy, I was shocked. We were addressed by the CS National Treasury, who told us that they were contemplating investing the money collected from the housing levy into treasury bills, meaning that we got money from members of the public and we are unable to absorb it. It therefore teaches me that we should have collected less to meet our capacity to absorb. Instead of wiping people's pay slips, and now we are unable to use that money. Mr. Speaker, finally, things to do. Mr. President, dissolve cabinet, reconstitute it. Mr. President, disband offices outside the Constitution, including CAS, including Prime Cabinet Secretary. It is not in the Constitution of Kenya. Mr. Speaker, including officers of First Ladies, including, Mr. Speaker, advisors. If advisors are useful, then what David Lee is doing is not advice, is misadvice. Mr. Speaker, the President should quickly restructure the security organs by firing people, the IG included. And finally, but not least, all the Sky teams must be grounded. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm on.
Senator Wambua. Senator Enoch.
Yeah? Okay, let me use the dispatch. I have a lot of documents. Mr. Speaker, I thank you. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing us to provide leadership. Mr. Speaker, we are doing this at a time that the people of Kenya feel, and rightfully so, that leaders have used them and dumped them. They feel that, Mr. Speaker, that they held the ladder for us to climb to the top of the tree and appropriate fruits for everyone. But when we got to the top, we kicked the ladder and we are eating the fruits alone, enjoying the fruits of their labor and vomiting on their heads. Mr. Speaker, this is a time of crisis. And at a time of crisis, the leadership must be demonstrated. We are here, Mr. Speaker, as the upper house, as senators of the Republic of Kenya, to provide that leadership. Mr. Speaker, we are hearing a lot of things from young people, from our constituents, and we cannot pretend that the things that these people are saying don't make sense to us. These things are sensible. I want to address myself, Mr. Speaker, to 3 issues in that motion. First, Mr. Speaker, is on the Finance Bill 2024-2025, which was a monster that triggered the crisis that this country finds itself in. If the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, had listened to the people, we would not be where we are today. Mr. Speaker, that's a point at which I want to respectively, as a leader, differ with the President on his comment during the interview that perhaps the 204 members of the National Assembly who voted in support of the finance bill would be our future heroes. Mr. Speaker, those 204 members of the National Assembly who voted yes for this bill are sellouts. They have failed this country. They have failed their constituents. They have reason to apologize to this country. As a Speaker, we are where we are, deep into a crisis that threatens to tear our country apart. The young people on the streets are the true patriots, people driven by a deep sense of love for their country. And they are saying they don't want their country to go to the dogs. They love their country. They love their lives. They have a future to look into. The Speaker, I must applaud this upper house of the Parliament of the Republic of Kenya for staying engaged at a time like this, because this is what is required of leadership. The leaders in the lower house, whose action has brought us where we are, have run away. We are here to clean up their mess. They should forever occupy their space and listen when the people of Kenya speak. They must listen when the upper house speaks. Mr. Speaker, my reading of Article 115 of the Constitution on presidential assent and referral tells me that, Mr. Speaker, we have a window to take possession of the finance bill referred by the President to Parliament and deal with it. Why do I say this, Mr. Speaker? I say this, Mr. Speaker, because the article deliberately says that the President shall refer the bill back to Parliament for reconsideration. Article 93 of the Constitution defines Parliament as both the National Assembly and the Senate. Mr. Speaker, lead with courage. Bring that bill to the floor of this House this afternoon or tomorrow, and let us deal with it. The Speaker, on the matter of the austerity measures, as captured in the motion that we are debating today. First, I want to call out the SRC, led by Lynn Cherop Megich, You are completely out of order. Completely out of order. How dare you publish salary increments for public and state officers at such a time as this? What exactly do you want to achieve? In fact, Mr. Speaker, because the majority leader, when he was moving this motion, he said that there are some institutions that must appear before us. The first institution should be the SRC. Who has sent them to fuel discontent in the country at a time that this country is bleeding? Who does that? Mr. Speaker, I want to echo the words of my leader, the minority leader in the Senate. We as senators, and we will pass it as a resolution at the end of this motion, we are not interested in that pay rise. We are not interested. In fact, one of the conversations that we have been having, and it will crystallize by the end of this motion, is where do we cut our own budgets as a Senate, as individual senators? For the SRC to do what they have done, I want to say this on the floor of this House: shame on that institution, and shame on Lynn Cherop Megich. The Speaker, the other officer that I want to call out, and I want to borrow the ears of the majority leader, because this is important. This is very important. I want to call out the head of public service, and for a reason. On May 24th, a day before this crisis started in this country, the head of public service wrote to the Public Service Commission to begin the process of recruiting CASs, the Cabinet Administrative Secretaries. Who does that at such a time as this? Who does that? Mr. Speaker, we want to call on the head of public service to receive that letter like yesterday. You cannot be advising or seeking advice from the PSC on how to recruit cabinet administrative secretaries at a time that we are saying we cannot afford the cost of running these offices. The Speaker, the next person of interest that should appear before this Senate and speak to the country is the head of the public service. The Speaker, I want to challenge the President, respectively again. The cost of living is what it is. Too much talk is not helping anyone. We have said everything that could be said. It is time for action. And there are things that I know the President can do and bring down the temperatures in this country. One of the things that he can do, even today, is to reduce the size of his cabinet. Mr. Speaker, the Constitution, Article 152, gives the President the minimum number of cabinet secretaries and the maximum number. He can appoint between 14 cabinet secretaries and 22 cabinet secretaries. As we speak now, we have 21 cabinet secretaries. The Speaker, I want to call on the President, as a demonstration that he has listened and understood what the people are saying. Reduce the size of your cabinet from 21 to 14, the minimum. Merge departments. Reduce the number of principal secretaries from 51 to around 30, or even 14, to match the number of cabinet secretaries that we have. The Speaker, and there is there's comparable jurisdiction to this argument. When you look at the United States of America, where we go to borrow money all the time, and we go for benchmarking all the time, Senator Alwale, the size of the cabinet in the US is 15, with a population of more than 340 million people. 14 cabinet secretaries in the US. When you look at China, with a population of more than 1.5 billion people, the members of the State Council, whose equivalent is the cabinet secretaries, are 26. What are we doing with 21 cabinet secretaries with a population of less than 60 million people and an economy that cannot support that kind of expenditure? The Speaker, let us reduce that number. The Speaker, on the matter of security, it is time for us all, and especially those who are in authority, to walk the talk. As I said, too much talk is not helping anyone. I'm hearing of the usual threats that those who break the law will face the full force of the law. That as we carry out these investigations, no stone will be left unturned. Mr. Speaker, those things stopped making sense a long time ago. It is time for action. This sitting of the Senate is a call to action, both from us and those others who are in positions of responsibility. Mr. President, if you love your country and you have listened to what the demonstrators are saying, let aid roll in the security apparatus and departments of this country. Speaker, I asked some young people from my office to tell me when, lastly, the Inspector General of Police, Japheth Kome, spoke to this nation. And they went to the archives and they have told me that the last time that the IG spoke to Kenyans was on 17th of April, 2024. And what was he saying? He was saying, and I quote, that as the Inspector General of Police, I would like to assure you, he is speaking to a contingent of police officers being dispatched to Haiti. He's saying, I want to assure you that they, the officers, have the capability, capacity, and training to succeed in this mission, and that they will deliver when they get to Haiti. That's the last thing that Kenyans heard from the IG. When the country is burning, the IG is silent. The Speaker, one of the requirements for demonstrations is that demonstrators would notify the police, they would be guided on where to go and how to organize their demonstrations, be escorted through streets or wherever they are going, presentation of petitions. The IG is absent. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, the words that the President used on the former IG, Mr. Mutiambai, on the level of incompetence and being clueless. Perhaps those words are better suited used on IG Kome. Perhaps actually the president spoke too early when he addressed Mutiambai. Talking about incompetence and lack of capacity, the Inspector General of Police is the embodiment of lack of capacity to lead the Kenya Police Service. Mr. Kome must leave office immediately for this country to enjoy peace and tranquility. The Speaker, lastly, let me speak very briefly on this matter of corruption. The Speaker, corruption has become the order of the day in this country. Unfortunately, the institution that has been charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption is itself the biggest den of corruption. The EACC, the Speaker, is either unwilling or unable to fight corruption in this country. They will not help us in this journey. The Speaker, I've listened to the presentation by the majority leader on the performance of the judiciary. Though I have gone on record to applaud the CJ, the Chief Justice, for having the courage to lead from the front, a lot more needs to be done in the judiciary, and especially on matters corruption. That justice now has become a commodity of sale in the judiciary is a very sad state of affairs in our country. We want this monster called corruption to be tackled properly, and the Speaker also challenged the demand side of corruption. Because there's also that demand side of corruption, the Speaker. We must have a candid conversation as a country. When churches and schools and hospitals and all manner of institutions, when they look at their members of parliament, the people serving the public service, as the people who are supposed to give them money in Arambes to do all these manner of things every weekend, every day of the week, where is it that we expect these people to get this money from? Mr. Speaker, we must have a national dialogue, a national conversation on how to fight corruption. But lastly, Mr. Speaker, the Speaker, including what Senator Onyonka has said, but more seriously and more importantly, this thing about members of parliament, about public officers being expected to dish out money in Arambes every day,
Let's add 2 minutes for the Senator to conclude.
Thank you, the Speaker, for indulging me. So this idea of members of parliament being seen as moving ATMs, people who have so much money to just give, to people. Mr. Speaker, that will not help us. We must learn to live within our means, both the leaders and the people being led. Let people not expect too much money, too much contributions from members at a time that we are saying we must uphold austerity for this country to move forward. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, as the majority has said in moving the motion, let us now have a new budget estimate tabled before Parliament so that now we can debate and pass a budget that reflects our ability to finance our own operations. Mr. Speaker, there was no reason why the members of the National Assembly added themselves 30 million shillings for CDF. What for? If you multiply 30 million shillings by 280 constituencies, that is 87 billion Kenya shillings. 8.7 billion Kenya shillings. Why are we doing that? For what? In fact, that money should be going to counties as part of the equitable share. The Speaker, we must confront these issues and deal with them as they are. The Speaker, with those many remarks, I support the motion.
Senator Samson Cherargei.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to congratulate the majority and minority leader and my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, for having to resist the temptation to go and hide, just like our colleagues have done, Mr. Speaker. I would be somewhere in Kimondi Forest near Kapsabet, running away from my prosperity, Mr. Speaker. And I want to ask, in fact, this should be corruption, where you run away from your duty, Mr. Speaker. I remember when we were supposed to resume is when unfortunate events and incidences were happening in the city, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy that I'm among the senators who found it wise to continue with our duty because we are being paid to proceed with our duty as envisaged by Article 96, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell Kenyans, including our young brothers and sisters, the Generation Z, because some of us are millennials, that we have heard you, we listen to you, we apologize for some of the transgressions that might have escaped our attention in addressing some of the challenges, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while a lot has gone through in this country, we must agree that some of these challenges that we face as a nation, Mr. Speaker, has built up for many years, many decades, Mr. Speaker, many challenges since, Mr. Speaker, the onset and independence, both pre and most post-colonial independence of this republic, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, when the young people decided to visit Parliament and enjoy the hospitality, although they went away with a number of flags, Mr. Speaker, and also were able to take photos at the floor of the House, at the National Assembly to be precise. And I saw one of the pastors, I don't know, speaking at that aftermath, Mr. Speaker. It was very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker. I saw people who were running helter and skelter, Mr. Speaker. The unfortunate part, as we were being evacuated, was some of the media houses were streaming live, Mr. Speaker, exposing the lives of many members of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I know yourself, not specifically, but the substantive Speaker, and Senator Chute and other colleagues said to use ambulances, Mr. Speaker, to escape the arm, Mr. Speaker. Even as that happened, Mr. Speaker, and I want to point out this, under Article 118, Article 34 and 35, right to freedom of information and media, we should not, even at any given time, Mr. Speaker, block or deny access to media the way it has been done, Mr. Speaker. We should look access of media to the floor and to Parliament prisons case by case, Mr. Speaker, because I'm told there is a silent gag order that has been issued against access of media to the prisons of Parliament, which is very unfair. Kenyans need to know what is happening, especially as the legislators transact business, Mr. Speaker. So I hope through your office you can consult and ensure that case by case, while I do not agree that media were able to expose members of Parliament and report live that they were being evacuated through the tunnel or being taken away by the ambulances or they were changing clothes, Mr. Speaker, I met one member of National Assembly, decided to remove the entire suit and wear a vest and a boxer to escape the rat, Mr. Speaker, through Landimawe, Mr. Speaker, in this city. While those are tactics that people evaded what was happening in that day, Mr. Speaker, it is not a justification to deny media access and issue a gag order against access to media to the prisons of Parliament. And therefore, I want to ask your office and Parliamentary Service Commission to resist the temptation to give out unconstitutional orders of denying access of media, because Kenyans need to know what we are doing. Mr. Speaker, I've used an example of 1932, when there were allegations that there was a letter that was being sent to the House of Congress and Senate that had poison. The Congress decided to close the House and run away. In the subsequent elections, the entire congressmen were voted out. But the Senate of the Republic of United States of America remained true to its cause and addressed the Great Recession, and that is why they are remembered. And that is why we have distinguished ourselves, Mr. Speaker, as the upper house. Mr. Speaker, there are many issues that young people have raised. Issue of corruption, issue of governance, both at national and county governments, Mr. Speaker. Issue of lack of opportunities. Issue of nepotism, Mr. Speaker. Issue of not being listened to. Mr. Speaker, there are many challenges, and I want to assure the Gen Z and any other Kenyan, Mr. Speaker, Parliament is a public place. If there were proper organization, they would have accessed Parliament. Many Kenyans access Parliament. I want to put this straight, Mr. Speaker. Under Article 126, 1 of the Constitution of Kenya, Mr. Speaker, Parliament can sit anywhere. And I want to call upon the Gen Z and any other Kenyan. Parliament can sit in Uhuru Park. Parliament can sit in Migori. That is why we have Senate machinery, Mr. Speaker. The Constitution gives us as a Parliament to sit even in Garissa, in Mandera, even in your county, Mr. Speaker, and listen to the Kenyans. And I'm happy as we talk this, Mr. Speaker, on the Senate machinery, we are doing it in Busia. We have done it in Makueni. We did it in Turkana. We have done it in Uasin Gishu, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans should know that Parliament is ready to listen to them. Under Article 126 of the Constitution, Parliament can sit anywhere within the borders of the Republic of Kenya. Even if they want us to sit in KICC, we can sit there, Mr. Speaker, and listen to Kenyans, and especially the Gen Z, Mr. Speaker. Number 3, Mr. Speaker, from the onset, I want to send my deepest condolences, Mr. Speaker, from my family, from myself and the great people of Nandi County, to many Kenyans who have lost their lives, unfortunately, and wish quick recovery to many Kenyans who, as both, Mr. Speaker, have endured injuries during this, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, even when we exercise Article 37, Mr.